A friend of mine once told me that her biggest fear was being raped on the first night of marriage, otherwise known as Sohag Raat, a night long glamorized as a soft-focused technicolor dream full of romance and rose-colored fulfillment, which in reality is full of unrealistic expectations and anxiety, fear, shame, and hope for the usually virgin couple, especially in South Asian communities. And forced or unwanted sexual encounter at any phase of a relationship can turn it into a nightmare or an unpleasant memory at the very least. Spousal rape and psychological impact of non-consensual sex in a marital setting is often not discussed even amongst friends. While it's easier to distinguish rape if it is done by a stranger, marriage blurs the lines of acceptable behavior and divorceable behavior and prosecutable behavior and criminal behavior. At the heart of this moral and legal quagmire is a very simple question. Does a woman lose her right to say no when she gets married? And does she cease to be an individual with separate human rights when she becomes a wife? A simple search of any news site, local, regional, or global, reveals all kinds of cases of spousal sexual violence across various kinds of communities, belief systems, and economic status. This is indeed a universal issue and is considered a taboo or uncomfortable topic in even traditional Western societies, as Without Consent by Sarah Weinman, published by HarperCollins in 2025, shows. In Pakistani context, you can check out articles and interviews of lawyer Sahar Bandial, considered an authority on the subject. She has been interviewed frequently by Dawn News English on general and spousal sexual assault cases. The interviews are available on YouTube. Here I'd like to introduce a few pages from Sex and Sexuality in Islam, a 788-page English-language hardcover published in 2006 in Pakistan by Nashriyat Lahore and written by Dr. Muhammad Aftab Khan, an expert in animal husbandry. The book's goal is laid out in preface by Professor Abdul Jabbar Shakir, who at the time was Deputy Director General of Dawa Academy, International Islamic University, Islamabad, as, quote, "This is an exhaustive and definitive research on the topic which has not been touched by the Muslim writers or scholars due to some psychological reasons. This specific knowledge is inevitable for each Muslim male or female, as it is not an ignominious topic in Sharia. Sex is a basic human instinct that plays a vibrant role in the building and nourishment of a human soul." Unquote. I bought it in 2007 or 2008 from the bookstore right next to Faisal Mosque, Islamabad. I think it was Dawa Academy's bookstore, but I'm not sure. At the time, the book was priced at 650 Pakistani rupees. It is currently available online for anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 Pakistani rupees. That is 7 to 10 American dollars. It's an interesting book for sure, whether you end up agreeing or disagreeing with any or some of its contents. It delves into all kinds of topics at length, such as sex education in Europe and America, sexual relations between spouses, and sexual violence, even marriage counseling, detailing laws and practices of various countries, and statistics and scientific research from Western literature, as well as verses from Islam's holy book, Quran, quotes of Prophet, peace be upon him, and interpretations by Muslim scholars. It also highlights social mores prevalent in Muslim societies, an exhaustive study for sure. As Professor Ghulam Rasul Tanvir, retired Dean of Faculty of Science, University of Agriculture, Faisalabad, says on the back cover, quote, "No aspect of this phenomenal issue, functional, racial, religious, historical, philosophic, or scientific, is globally left out, socially untouched, and humanly unexplored. It is a successful, ambitious venture." Unquote. On page 722, the author, Dr. Aftab Khan, lists the consequences of rape as given in the misspelled Dr. Charlene Moyhallenhard's 1995 research paper, What Sexual Scientists Know About Rape. She is associated with the Department of Psychology in University of Kansas at present, as she was in 1995. I'm reading the passage from the book. The passage is from pages 722 to 723. Quote, "The consequences can be psychological, sexual, and physical. Psychological consequences can include fear and anxiety, phobias and panic disorder, depression, suicidal thought and attempts, anger, lower self-esteem, feelings of guilt, fatigue, problems with trust, social adjustment, and alcohol and drug abuse. Sexual consequences include decreased sexual satisfaction, increased sexual dysfunction, avoiding of sex, and engaging in sex indiscriminately, perhaps because victim feels as if they have nothing left to protect. Physical consequences include injury, pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and psychosomatic problems related to stress. Many of these consequences can be conceptualized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The PTSD involves persistent re-experiencing of rape, for example in thought, flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance of thoughts, feeling, or situation associated with the rape, or feeling numb, detached, or estranged from others, and heightened physiological arousal, for example, hypervigilance, difficulty with sleeping or concentrating, or irritability. The same researcher, that is Dr. Mohallan Hard, further says that, contrary to stereotypes, the consequences of acquaintance rape are as serious as those of stranger rape. Rape by a friend, partner, or spouse involves a violation of trust and often makes victims doubt their judgment. Rape by a spouse or partner is likely to occur repeatedly and often accompanied by battering." Unquote. And this is why I wanted to share this particular passage from the book. It's important. The inclusion of this research passage in this book, especially these last two lines, that is, acknowledging that rape by a friend, partner, or spouse involves a violation of trust and often makes victims doubt their judgment. Rape by a spouse or partner is likely to occur repeatedly and often accompanied by battering. It is indicative of a thoughtful and pragmatic author in the form of Dr. Aftab Khan. But most importantly, I think forms of abuse in Muslim families, given from pages 740 to 745, are more relevant for this video essay, as well as for local and migrant families settled abroad. In fact, I believe most of the patterns of abuse termed Muslim in these passages that I'm about to read are actually a South Asian phenomena, existing in conservative Sikh and Hindu families as they do in Muslim households from South Asia, even those settled overseas, the NRIs or NRPs or NRBs. Okay, so the passages that I'm about to read are from pages 740 to 745. And just bear with me because you will recognize many families and many behavior patterns, something from your community. Quote, "Forms of abuse in Muslim families. Wife abuse results in severe emotional and physical pain for many. Such women fail to contribute adequately to the development of the Muslim community. Domestic violence is an ongoing debilitating experience of physical, psychological, and/or sexual abuse in the home. Although Islam promises women protection from such problems, the reality in many Muslim homes is different. The most common form of abuse is emotional and mental abuse. Based on the information from many sources, the North American Council for Muslim Women says that approximately 10% of Muslim women are abused emotionally, physically, and sexually by their Muslim husbands. This includes verbal threats to divorce the wife, to remarry, to take the kids away if she does not do exactly as she is told, intimidation and threats of harm, degradation, humiliation, insults, ridicule, name-calling, and criticism, false accusations and blaming her for everything, ignoring, dismissing, or ridiculing her needs, neglect, and the silent treatment, spying on her, telling her she is a failure and will go to hell, twisting Islamic teachings to make her feel worthless because she is a woman, restricting her access to transportation, healthcare, food, clothing, money, friends, or social services, physical and social isolation, extreme jealousy and possessiveness, lying, breaking promises, destroying trust, etc. Emotional abuse can take place in public or at home. Unquote. Now, a bit of a timeout over here. I'm sure that these are things that are not really unique to Muslim households or some crazy man out there. These are pretty standard operating procedures in abusive households, as you will see once that we get to Without Consent by Sarah Weinman. Okay, so continuing from Sex and Sexuality in Islam, page 741, quote, Muslim community tends to dismiss the seriousness of mental abuse, rationalizing it as a petty argument between husband and wife, and saying it's not serious unless he hits her. In reality, mental abuse does severe psychological harm to many Muslim women. It destroys their self-esteem and makes them question their self-worth. Some have mental breakdowns and go insane. Furthermore, psychological abuse can lead to physical abuse. Physical abuse includes pushing, shoving, choking, slapping, punching, kicking, and beating, assault with a weapon, tying up, refusing to help her when she is sick or injured, physically throwing her out of the house, etc. Physical abuse escalates in frequency and severity. Another form of abuse is sexual abuse, involving forced, violent sex. For example, a wife may not want to have sex for health reasons, but the husband may force her anyway. Tahmina Durrani, in her 1991 book, has exposed the occurrence of forced and violent sex by her husband, not only at home but also in jail. She has also vividly sketched this issue in the upper strata of Pakistani society. These three forms of abuse are usually related and occur for a long period of time. Muslim men, just like non-Muslims, often start with mental abuse and work their way up. Muslim women need to recognize the signs of escalating abuse. There are a number of factors that make many Muslim men abusive. Abusers often pick up the habit after watching their own fathers abuse their mothers in Muslim countries. Their children learning this abusive behavior then abuse their wives. For cultural reasons, some Muslim men accept the idea that it's normal for a man to hit his wife and that she is no more than a piece of his property. A Muslim should know it clearly that Islam rejects all forms of discrimination against women on the basis of her sexuality. Some Muslim husbands abuse their wives as a result of frustration resulting from economic hardship, problems with the children, or an inferiority complex. Some abuse their wives because they want them to be more modern and less Islamic by removing their hijab, while others are abusive because they want the opposite. Tragically, some Muslim men actually use Islam to justify their abusive behavior, focusing on rituals, considering themselves to be Islamically knowledgeable, and disregarding the spirit of Islam. They wrongly use the Quranic verses that says men are the protectors and maintainers of women to go on power trips, demand total obedience, and order their wives around. They disregard the Islamic requirement for the head of the household to consult with other members of the family when making decisions. Then, if their wives dare to speak up or question their orders, these men misinterpret a Quranic verse that talks about how to treat a disobedient wife and use it as a license for abuse. Abusive men are completely disregarding the Islamic teachings of kindness, mercy, gentleness, and forgiveness, just as they are disregarding the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who never hit a woman and was extremely gentle and compassionate with his family. In a hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, In Tirmidhi, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "The one most perfect in his faith is he whose conduct is the best, and the best amongst you is he who behaves best with his wife." An important problem in the Muslim countries and elsewhere is that many Muslims don't want to get involved in the private family affairs of other Muslims. Rather than enjoining good and forbidding evil, rather than trying to stop abuse in a friend's or neighbor's family by offering to mediate between the husband and wife, or by encouraging them to speak to Muslim counselors, many irresponsible Muslims close their eyes and pretend they don't know there's a problem. So the abuse goes on. Another reason why abuse isn't stopped is that many abused Muslim women simply don't seek out help. They are afraid that if their situation becomes public, they will lose their privacy, and they fear the abusers will become more hostile when the negative publicity gets back to them. Abused Muslim women also keep quiet out of a feeling of hopelessness and a belief that no one will help them, out of financial dependence on their husbands, out of a desire to keep homes together for the children's sake, or out of love for the abusive husbands, a peculiar dilemma of the Indo-Pakistani Muslim women. Continuing on page 743, in the Western and Muslim countries, many Muslim women or their parents or relatives turn to Imams and ulama, religious scholars, but often find them unhelpful. These scholars often tell these women to be patient and pray for the abuse to end. Some scholars make the abused Muslim women feel guilty. Still others, who are sincerely but mistakenly misinterpreting Islam by putting the importance of family privacy above any harm that might come to the individual woman, tell the women it is wrong for them to discuss their problems with anyone other than their husbands. Such opinions of the scholars stem from ignorance, cowardice. Ironically, there seems to be great similarity in the views of the Christian clergy and Muslim scholars in discouraging the women in solving such problems. This had led the Western women to revolt against Christianity in 18th century. Muslim scholars seem to follow their counterparts, and the result should not be expected to be different. Rather, a section of progressive women have openly started denying the religion of Mullah. This seems to be the first drop of rain revolting against Islam. Relatively few persons have had the wisdom and courage to tackle the problem head-on. As a result of this, many abused women don't bother turning to scholars for help. Looking for other sources of help, abused Muslim women often turn to Muslim female activists and Muslim women's organizations for help. Many women go even further, leaving Islam altogether because the Muslim community fails to live up to the Islamic promise of protection, brotherhood, and sisterhood. Unquote. A bit of a timeout over here. Like I said, whether you agree with the content or not, it's an interesting take. Okay, so continuing from Sex and Sexuality in Islam, this is on page 744. Quote, "The media gives full coverage daily to the case of husband violence against wife, and women from the religious families are revolting against such behavior of the menfolk. Thus, it is high time for the Muslim scholars to rise and attend to this issue of crucial importance in order to save the Muslim families from disintegration." Continuing on page 744, despite the severity of the problem, the Muslim community has largely closed its eyes and devoted very few resources to helping the victims and stopping the abusers. First, the community must accept the fact that there is a problem and that it doesn't know how to deal with it. Then, a core group of trusted, active Muslim men and women who are committed to ending wife abuse in Muslim society and to strengthening Muslim families must become knowledgeable about Islamic guidelines on the family and be trained in crisis intervention and counseling. Educational programs at community gatherings through Friday khutbahs, sermons, educational seminars and workshops explaining what Islamic family life should be like and explaining that there is help available for abused women will let abused Muslim women know they have a way to stop the pain. These trained Muslims should give abused women shelter at people's homes or at community facilities. such as a rented apartment, for periods ranging from several days to several months, depending on the extent of the abuse, while consoling them. While caring for the abused women, the trained Muslims should counsel the abusers separately, making them aware of the reasons they abuse, of the fact that their actions are truly harming their wives, that such behavior is completely un-Islamic, and that God will hold them accountable. After separate counseling, the next step would be joint counseling for the husband and wife, and then counseling for the entire family. Community education is an indispensable factor on top of all this. The community needs to establish classes to teach Muslim men, young and old, how to be a proper husband and father, and to teach Muslim women, young and old, how to be proper wives and mothers. Many Muslims don't know their rights and obligations in these roles." Unquote. A bit of a timeout over here. This, I believe, is similar to the Tradwife consultancy that is operating in a place that was written about in Vanity Fair, that consists of Bible studies. Okay, so continuing from Sex and Sexuality in Islam, this passage is from 745. Quote, "It is earnestly desirable to start educating children, young and adults, to be compassionate, to value the family, and to resolve problems in an Islamic, non-violent manner. The Imams and other ulamas, peers, spiritual leaders, need to emphasize upon their followers, men, women, young and old, how to be a good Muslim husband, father, and wife, mother. The young boys and girls should be given counseling before marriage about the rights and obligations of each other in the marital life as wife and husband. The boys, would-be husbands, must be apprised of their obligations and the fact that the marriage is a contract and a pledge, which they are making not only before the witnesses and participants of the marriage ceremony, but also before Allah the Almighty. The husband, wife, is accountable to Allah for all the bad actions once the marriage contract is established." The Muslims living in the Western countries need to realize their obligations towards the heinous act of wife abuse. They have a double role to play while living in an un-Islamic environment. Firstly, they need to present a good example before the non-Muslim neighbors. They need to deal much more effectively with wife abuse in order to stop the immediate sufferings of the people in abusive situation and to help build healthy Muslim families. Secondly, the knowledgeable Muslims should form a group to educate people about the problem as indicated above, the topic of marriage counseling before and after the marriage, and the awareness about the rights and obligations of the spouses, as well as the family life, has been dealt with in this book in chapter 15. Unquote. So I think that this was very interesting. So the reason why I wanted to share these particular paragraphs from this book, Sex and Sexuality in Islam by Dr. Aftab Khan, is because he is not just recognizing that there's a problem or can be a problem, but also the need for the Muslim community to step up and to not look away and to not remain silent and to be proactive about positive, progressive solutions. And I'm glad that this has been included in this book. Irrespective of, there are plenty of other things in the book, and some may agree with them, some may disagree with them, irrespective of that, because everyone has their own opinion. Now coming to Sarah Weinman's book, Without Consent, a landmark trial and the decades-long struggle to make spousal rape a crime, published by HarperCollins in 2025. Though Without Consent by Sarah Weinman contains true stories of forced sexual encounters between American couples and the aftermath of such events in both the legal and cultural space, and is written by an American author for an American public, I believe it's a book that South Asian women and men can also benefit from tremendously. No matter how a couple met or the nature of their intimate partnership, marriage or live-in situation, etc., you can clearly recognize a pattern or cycle of abuse and counter-abuse brought on by multiple factors that culminate in that act of violence which is called marital rape, and how women and men react to these situations. I think men and women or any couple living in a state of dysfunction will recognize the pattern of domestic chaos, the cycle of on-off relationship that the first couple introduced in the book has. And I'm sharing the way that the act of forced or unwanted sex unfolded in their case in the middle of their regular quarrels. In a perfect world, Greta Hibbard and John Glessman would never have met, hooked up, or married. In 1975, she is 19, he is 17. Both are semi-educated, poor, and have limited options for upward social mobility. Both have less than ideal parental supervision. Both grow up in unstable home environment and lack solid future purpose and direction. She gets pregnant. They get married. Their coupledom is a case study of shotgun wedding because of unwanted pregnancy, without any real attachment, knowledge, or understanding of one another. Their union is only exacerbated by poverty and irregular jobs and salaries. Their different personalities and mood swings don't help matters either, nor does the fact that they aren't really committed to each other, both stepping out on their marriage. That is, both have a fling on the side. They briefly separate but get back together, primarily because, as Greta later told news reporters, she never had any real money nor permanent living situation to fall back on and got tired of living on welfare checks, so she kept going back to a marriage and arrangement that she didn't like and knew wouldn't work in the long term. In fact, she never really wanted to marry John or stay married to him and is looking for a divorce lawyer and escape. John, on the other hand, has a hard time letting go of her. You get the feeling that he was more invested in the relationship than she was. They frequently quarrel over money or infidelity or sex. During these episodes, he is showing signs of being physically abusive, with a fist flung here and there and demands of sex from her. Even neighbors can hear them and know about their problems. In Chapter 1, The Rideouts, it is written, quote, "For the Rideouts, sex was the main thread between all their arguments, according to one friend and neighbor. Their fights largely revolved around the subject, with John wanting much more sex than Greta and not taking no for an answer. The couple also got on each other's cases about past relationships, as well as an ongoing affair John had with a girl he had gone to school with in Silverton. During these fights, John would repeatedly tell Greta that he loved her. When he did so and began to cry, Greta responded, 'Well, I don't love you.' Another neighbor heard her say that she wasn't at all sure whether she loved him at all, and that she was just staying there for the benefit of their child, Jenny." Unquote. In 1978, she is 23 years old, he is 21, and both are raising a 2.5-year-old daughter, Jenny, in an apartment in Salem, Oregon, when the alleged marital rape occurs. I'm calling it alleged because though Greta made the allegation, called the police right away, John was arrested and there was a trial, a jury determined he was not guilty of rape. He had his own narrative to counter hers. I'm sharing what Greta told her lawyer and the court. Lots of women will identify with how it all unfolded and how a squabble spiraled into physical and sexual violence. The day starts simple enough. Greta is doing household chores and John is chilling in the living room, and then it starts. You can see the passages on your screen right now and can press pause and read them. I'll be quiet so that you can go through them. They are from Chapter 2, That Awful October Afternoon. John's side of the story is given at 12% mark in Chapter 4, Choosing Sides. Again, I'm leaving it on the screen for you to pause and read it. The trial, legal gamesmanship, and media circus that ensued is covered in subsequent chapters in great detail and will tell you how little gender relations and news coverage on such cases has changed since the 70s. Not much has changed either in US, despite the laws protecting women, even married women, from forced or unwanted sex, but also in South Asia, indeed the world. At the heart of it all is a basic premise of consent that even the judge in this case ruled on when he said in one of the pre-trial motions to dismiss, denying the motion on the basis that, quote, "I don't think there is a contractual consent to forceful intercourse just because a person is married," unquote. This is given at 12% mark in Chapter 4, Choosing Sides. And Gloria Allred, who in 1978 was the coordinator for the Los Angeles chapter of the National Organization for Women, is quoted in the book as saying this about the trial, that, quote, "A man can't go into a bedroom and beat his wife. Why can he go into the bedroom and abuse her sexually?" Unquote. This is at 23% mark, Chapter 7, Acquittal. Now these two things that the judge and Gloria Allred have said, these two statements, form the basis of a moral as well as legal question. Does a woman lose her right to say no when she gets married? And does she cease to be an individual with separate human rights when she becomes a wife? In Chapter 4, Choosing Sides, it is written, quote, "Within 3 weeks of John's arrest, Kelly, his lawyer, filed a motion that challenged the constitutionality of Oregon's 1977 rape law. It was an expected move since the law had yet to be tested. The right of private marital relations is so fundamental and long-standing that it is a right and a part of our society that cannot be regulated or intruded upon by the government," Kelly argued. He also challenged the statute on several other constitutional grounds: the defendant's right to privacy to engage in private marital relations, that the rape law interferes with and impairs existing obligations of contract, and above all, that it treats wives differently from husbands. Unquote. These three things are also given as reasons in any argument that is held on this subject in even Pakistan. I mean, look at the way Charles Burt, John's new lawyer, was quoted in a story as saying in Chapter 4, Choosing Sides, quote, "Rape is not with meaning when it's a husband and wife." Another of Burt's soundbites would be widely quoted in newspaper reports. "A woman who's still in a marriage is presumably consenting to sex. Maybe this is the risk of being married, you know?" Unquote. In fact, there's a rather unfortunate off-the-cuff remark from a California State Senator, Bob Wilson, given in Chapter 11, Laura X, who said at a dinner of National Council for Jewish Women in 1979, quote, "If you can't rape your wife, who can you rape?" Unquote. Apart from this attitude and ingrained thinking that a woman loses her right to say no or ceases to be an individual with separate human rights when she becomes a wife, there's also the semantics of it all. The vicious violation associated with the word rape is such that wives are hesitant to associate it with forced or unwanted sex within marriage. And the dilemma always is what to do if there is such a forced act, or a continuous pattern of forced acts. The word rape has such a strong connotation attached to it that in research quoted in this book, even wives have a problem connecting it with what happens in their married lives. At 9% mark in Chapter 3, Marital Rape, the author writes, quote, "When researchers David Finkelhor and Kirsty Weilow surveyed more than 300 women in Massachusetts about their marital experiences for their 1985 book License to Rape, one of the very few books then and now on the topic, a sizable number of them, around 10%, described forcible acts by their husbands that sounded a lot like rape, even if they wouldn't have used the word themselves." Unquote. And at 43% mark in Chapter 12, The Tide Turns, the author mentions Diana Russell, an American researcher, and her book Rape in Marriage. Quote, "This book, Rape in Marriage, focused entirely on women who had been sexually victimized by their husbands, making it the first book exclusively devoted to spousal rape. Russell and her researchers had surveyed 930 women in California about their experience, of sexual assault within and outside of marriage. They decided to be as open-ended as possible with their questions and to not use the word rape. That way, they believed they would elicit more honest and truthful answers from the women they surveyed. Even so, the results were both shocking and utterly unsurprising. 14% of the women Rasul and her team surveyed, who were currently or had once been married, reported having been raped by their husbands. But the vast majority of these women didn't see themselves as being rape victims. They certainly believed they had been forced to have sex, but rape as a word made them shut down and get less candid with Rasul and her researchers. Unquote. And coming back to the first case given in the book, even though John was acquitted of charge of rape, he could have easily been convicted of assault and battery if it had been there on the table for the jury to consider. Or at least the jury could have reached a compromise between the first-degree rape charge, which carried the possibility of being sentenced for up to 20 years, or at least assault, if given the option. The lead prosecutor, in his case, decided to only go ahead with the single charge of rape, thereby limiting the 12-member jury to all or nothing, which seemed crazy to me because Greta and John both were young, problematic, grey individuals, and jury would probably not want to send a 21-year-old man with a spotless discharge from army to 20 years in prison. And they didn't, delivering the verdict a mere 2.5 hours after being given the case to deliberate, and the crowd in the courthouse gave an applause. As an epilogue of sorts of this particular story, Greta and John did get back together for a while after this trial, made a bit of money from media appearances, $800 to be exact, and then went their separate ways. Sarah Weinman follows this story up by showing the development of legal issues of consensual and non-consensual sex and criminalization of spousal rape in other U.S. states. There are also real-life stories of other women who dealt with coercive control, physical, verbal, and sexual abuse, and felt fear, resentment, anger, and loneliness in their marriages because of it. Francine Hughes, who killed her abusive husband after a sexual assault after years of abuse, in a case that is as much remembered for its acquittal of Hughes as it is for the TV movie Burning Bed, in which Farrah Fawcett played Hughes. And Chapter 15 recounts the Lorena Bobbitt case, where the wife cut off her husband John Bobbitt's genital organ after a sexual assault. So all kinds of cases, all kinds of mild to extreme examples are given in this book on the non-consensual violent behavior in intimate partner or marital relationships. These can help us in recognizing the universality of the problem when we read about Shanti's case in newspapers. Here in Pakistan, a 19-year-old newly married Hindu girl who was allegedly sodomized with a metal pipe by her 25-year-old groom Ashok Mohan, leading to her death, the details of which are given in a Zofin T. Ibrahim piece published in Dawn on 1st August 2025. Or about Behzad Akbar, a lawyer at the Legal Aid Society, a Pakistani NGO, who secured a conviction for a wife who accused her husband of forcing her to engage in sexual activity. The conviction was under Section 377 of Pakistan Penal Code, which outlaws unnatural offences, which Behzad Akbar said came under the definition of rape and marital rape following an amendment brought under Section 375 of PPC in 2021. For this reason alone, consider this book, Without Consent by Sarah Weinman, to be a friend who will confirm the experience and emotions you are going through, that you are not alone.